I just want to say that in all my years involved in business improvement, business growth, business execution, what I just saw this morning was a rare occurrence, and that was when the CEO of the organisation issues the awards for the Green Belt and Black Belt achievements, and really holds it in high regard. And I think that's a pretty rare thing to see, particularly in Australia, and to me that's a signal that this has really got the drive behind it that it needs, and it will be a success. So I congratulate you on that. That's quite amazing to see. So without any further ado, I have 30 minutes to talk. When I was asked to come and speak to you, I said that, look, if I'm going to come along and just talk to you, I don't want to do it. What I want to do is come along and teach you something. I'm not a speaker, I'm a teacher, okay? And the question I've got for you, is it okay if I teach you something? Yes. Are you sure? Yes. Okay. To get us started, I want to tell you a quick story, because I've had nearly a 40-year working career, and in that time had a number of careers within that, and some pretty diverse type functions and roles, some a bit clandestine, some out in the open. And many years ago I was, in fact it was in the late 90s, I was working for BHP in an overseas appointment, and they ran an asset that generated about $1 billion in revenue per annum, and it was in a third world country. Now, the location of this asset was very strongly integrated with the community, and I'll draw it for you a little bit so you get a sense of what it looked like. There was an intersection in the main town that kind of looked like this, and they had a building here called the White House, and the White House was where the executive team ran the business. And over the road they had a police station up here, and a big shopping centre, and they had a bank branch located kind of on the corner. Now, one particular day I was walking from the White House across to a four-wheel drive, going to get in and drive somewhere, and there was no other cars in the car park. As I walked across here, suddenly gunfire erupted, and the gunfire was happening in this direction. So there was machine guns, M16s, shotguns, and I don't know if you've ever been shot at, but it's a pretty frightening experience to hear the crack thump. Have you ever heard of that? Crack thump is the sound you hear if you're being shot at. If you hear gunfire and it's just bang, that's a good sign because they're not shooting at you. But if you hear crack bang, you know the bullet's coming past you. So there's all this crack thumping occurring. So I bolted over here, ran over here and got down behind the four-wheel drive. And I sat there, and there was bullets and pellets hitting the front of the building here. Now, interestingly enough, the board decided they would have their board meetings. So the chairman of the board of a multi-billion-dollar company and his board decided that they would have their meeting with the managing director at one of the assets. It just happened to be this asset. So the board meeting is being held right there. During this occurring, the chairman of the board stuck his head out the window. Actually stuck to have a look and see what was happening. So he got some certain instructions from me that I wouldn't repeat here, and pulled his head back in. Now, that situation, right, is fairly extreme. The way it worked for me was it opened a door. It gave me an opportunity to present my ideas to, of all people, the chairman of the board, the managing director, and get those ideas implemented really quickly without much fuss. Now, how often does that situation arise? Right, not very often. Now, the content of what I'm talking about here is pitching ideas, and you're not always going to get those situations where you can pitch an idea and the circumstances allow them to be implemented very quickly. In most cases, you're going to be pushing against resistance and thinking patterns that aren't necessarily on board with you. Would you agree with that? Yes. Okay. How many of you are parents? Up the back. How many are parents in the room? Okay. Raise your hand if you're in a relationship. Okay. Raise your hand if you're trying to get out of a relationship. No. Would you agree that getting people like your other people like your children or your peers or the people that you relate to in some formal or informal relationship is more difficult often to get change to occur than it is in other circumstances where you're a stranger? Would you agree with that? So that's the place where you kind of practice it, because if you can master it there, you can master it anywhere. How many of you are involved in huddles and continuous improvement and getting people to do new behaviours that are going to become standard operating procedures? By show, every hand should go up on that one, shouldn't they? And in those circumstances, you're required to pitch ideas to people as well, aren't you? You have to get them rolled out there. You have to get people to do stuff. We're talking about influencing people to change their behaviour. Now, if you think about it, right, smart people come up with good ideas. Smart people present these ideas to other people, but how often do we get that resistance, that pushback, that lack of buy-in, that sense of frustration when you know you've got a good idea and people aren't buying into it? Who's ever felt that frustration by show of hands? Everyone in the room's felt that, haven't you? Okay. Now, if you think about waste, and I noticed that Ian mentioned the word waste this morning, one of the greatest wastes in business in the 21st century is when a good idea is poorly pitched and people don't buy into it. Because it wastes the time of the person who developed the idea or the group of people who developed the idea, and it also causes the organisation to miss opportunities. And I think that's a 21st century waste that kind of goes unseen. What do you think of that? A good idea is poorly pitched is just a damn shame in the current environment. And I also think it's irresponsible in many ways to have a good idea and not pitch it well. Okay? So, what I want to talk about today, right, is a framework or almost a standard operating procedure for pitching an idea. Would that be useful to you? Okay, it's a framework for pitching ideas that raises the likelihood that people will buy into it. It doesn't mean that people will buy into the idea all the time. It just means that the potential or the likelihood of them buying into it is raised. Now, it's particularly important in situations where you don't have formal control over people, and that's probably the majority of the time. Okay, so where it fits is somewhere in this domain here. If I were to draw a light bulb which represents an idea, okay, we've got this idea that we want to present to people, and what we want to get is some sort of action or behaviour change at the end of it. Now, we can follow one of two paths, and the paths we follow to get that action depend upon circumstances. The one that we can fall back to very easily, and I think most people do in the way that they present ideas within organisations, relies very much on the formal structure of the organisation, and that's really where we dictate. That's where we focus on the action and say, here's the action, go and do it. How often does that occur? A lot, doesn't it? Right, it's probably it's the natural fallback. So we're very good at being able to pass on an activity, but that kind of assumes that the person has no choice about the activity. How often do people have choice? Probably most of the time. So if they have choice, they can go yes or no, then what we've got to do is we've got to pitch it. It's meant to be a baseball, right? We've got to pitch that idea in a way that they're more likely to say yes than no. Does that make sense? So it's that pitching framework. Now, pitch is, I would define it as any time where you're presenting an idea in order to get an action or behaviour from different people, and they have a choice about whether or not they give you that behaviour. Does that make sense? So in those circumstances, you have to pitch. As an independent, a small to medium enterprise, most of our work is pitching. Now, I know with my kids, I have a 28-year-old son and a 22-year-old daughter. Every time I try to get an activity, guess what I've got to do? What have I got to do? I've got to pitch it. Yeah, I can't tell them what to do, but I've got to pitch the idea in such a way that they're kind of more willing, motivated in doing it. Does that make sense? Okay, so how does it work? In order for us to understand a framework which you can use at home or at work, you can use in the implementation of continual improvement ideas, getting people to buy into different ways of working, whether it be for $1 value or whether it be for a $100 million contract, right? This framework applies to all of them. In order to be able to use it, we've got to understand the interaction between actions and emotions and the way that we think. Okay, now I've drawn a four-circle model here, which is was going to give us a clue about how we would approach a pitch. If we think about the end result, right? Let's say the outcome. Any outcome, the quality of it is determined by the quality of the actions or behaviours of a human being. Would you agree that the quality of what we do determines the quality of what we get? Would that be fair? The quality of what we do, whether or not we do it, determines whether or not we get the result. So there's kind of an upstream connectivity here. What determines the quality of the actions or behaviours people engage in? Okay. emotional state. The quality of what people do is based on how they feel. That be fair? If someone's feeling apprehensive, like public speaking, who's ever done public speaking in the room? You know, they say that's the number one fear on the planet. People fear public speaking more than death. They'd rather be in the coffin than give the eulogy. It's that if they feel apprehensive or doubtful about their ability when they step on the stage, what's going to happen to the action that they engage in? It's going to be down here somewhere, would you agree? The quality's raised as the quality of how they feel is raised. So emotional state drives behaviours, which produces outcomes. What determines the quality of the emotional state? It's going to be the quality of their thinking and beliefs. What's happening up here? Now, a question for you. Do the outcomes people get affect their thinking and beliefs? Do they? Absolutely. So it's kind of a closed loop in many ways. So this gives us a clue on how we would pitch an idea. How many of you remember back when the previous government pitched the carbon tax? Was there resistance? Do you remember they spent $30 million after the pitch to try and show people why it was important? The why came after. They did a pitch in the wrong syntax. They got the sequence all wrong. So kind of threw it out in the wrong sequence and everyone kind of jammed, locked up. So the vault was locked. And then they tried to open it again through, different strategies. So this gives us a clue on how we approach it. If you're going to present something, okay, the very first thing that you throw out there is what I'll refer to as an abstract idea. An abstract idea. And an abstract idea is an idea related to an outcome that your audience wants. Does that make sense? So you open your pitch that way. And the reason you do it is when you present something that they want that's abstract, very high, do you have agreement or disagreement? You have agreement. Yeah, you begin the pitch with a point of agreement. And anyone ever involved in negotiation knows, do not start a conversation at a point of disagreement. You've got to start it in that sequence, right? So the abstract idea gets presented. The second thing you throw out is the why. Okay, and the why is a negative why. Okay, it's a pain-driven why. I'll demo this for you in a second, okay? I'll just show you the model. The why is related to their thinking and beliefs and their emotional state. So you see what we're doing? We're following the cycle. So we throw out the why and it's a negative why. The next thing in the sequence is the what. Okay, what your idea is. What do you suppose the what's connected to? It's here. We going okay so far? Okay. The next thing in the sequence is how it works, which is connected to that as well. And then you finish off the syntax or sequence with a positive why, which is connected to the outcome. How are we going so far? All good? Okay. So what we're doing is we're trying to follow the way that a human being processes information. Now, anyone who's ever studied neurology or studied the way the brain works, the very first port of call, particularly for an audience that don't know you, right, is what people refer to as the lizard brain response. It's the very centre survival part of their brain where they listen very carefully, very quickly, and make a judgment call about what's going to hurt them. So they're seeking the pain side of it, right, at the beginning. And if you don't hit them up front with the why you should change from a negative perspective, and in fact the number one error that people make is they present all the positive or benefits about a change first. Okay? If you don't hit them with the negative side of it in the beginning of the pitch, what they will do is associate negativity to your change. Does that make sense? Because they're looking to associate it at the beginning. There's got to be a reason to change, and it's mostly primarily pain-driven. Okay? Is this making sense to you? Okay. The mistake that you will make is that you come up with a great idea and you go, yes, I got it. It's going to give us all these benefits. And you begin your pitch with all the benefits you're going to get with the change. Wrong sequence. It can close the door. Okay. The second mistake that people make is they throw the what out before the why. When Julia Gillard presented the carbon tax, you know what the first thing that came out of her mouth was? What I want to talk to you about today is the carbon tax. What was the response of the audience, generally? Supportive or negative? was this resistance. You could generalise and say that the vast majority of people resisted the concept because the what came out first. Does that make sense? So the two mistakes are, and I'll get you to repeat this a little bit. Two mistakes are, the first one, when you throw out the reason why, it's a positive, not a negative. Okay? What's the first mistake? When you throw out the why, it's a positive, not a negative. The second mistake is that you throw out the what before the why. What's the second mistake? Oh, come on. You said I could teach you something. What's the second mistake? What before the why. It's a mistake. You don't tell them what it is until they get in their heads that they've got to do something different. Does that make sense? Okay. And then we close it out. So we do a positive why, a negative why up front and a positive one at the back end. Okay, let me model it for you. This can be used in any conversation, whether it be at home, whether it be working with peers, whether it be working, presenting to customers, whether it be a short pitch for a new product sale to someone, or whether it be a pitch for a contract worth $100 million. The framework is still the same, okay? I'll give you an example of it. Let's say I go home and I got an idea about a family holiday. Okay, the way that I might pitch it following this flow would be this. I'd walk into the house and I'd go, hey guys, you know what? I think it's about time that we all got together, dropped all our work, spent some time connecting, chilling out and kind of refueling the bodies. Because I noticed you guys, been studying, doing your assignment work up till late in the night. You're not connecting with your friends. We aren't chilling out and watching the TV shows that we would normally watch together. Okay? We need some refueling. What I'm proposing is we have a family holiday. And a family holiday is one where we don't do any work. We just connect, we chill out, we go away and we enjoy the place. And how we're going to approach it is this. You kids, you're going to go and come up with 5 or 6 ideas where we can go. Mum and I are going to go and develop a budget and work out what we can afford. Okay? Now, if we do this, what's going to happen is that blah, blah, blah. And I could go on. Get the gist of it? How easy is that? How easy? Pretty simple? How logical is it? Once you get it, it's quite logical, isn't it? Yeah. If you change the syntax, if you change the sequence, you've got to think in terms of... here's an example. I downloaded the new CommBank app the other day. It's very cool. Very cool. But if it has a passcode in, a number to get into it, which I set up. What if I put that number in the wrong sequence? What happens? It's locked, isn't it? You can't get in. And I think if it's, I'm not sure, actually I'm not going to try it. If it's like a phone, if you put the wrong passcode in 3 times, what happens? Now you can't get into it. Now you've got to ring up someone and get access. And if you think in terms of pitching ideas, if you pitch an idea in the wrong syntax and you get resistance, what do people go and do? Yeah, they lock you out. So people will go back and they'll reform their pitch. They'll twist the solution or whatever it might be. Then they'll come back and they'll pitch it again. But if they get the syntax wrong, what's happening? Do you get this, the metaphor? They're typing the code in there, getting a no. Type the code in, get a no, right? Eventually you get locked out. 2 or 3 times, you can't get change to occur. But my observation in my 40 years of working is that if you do that in an organisation, you pitch it once and you get it wrong, and you pitch it twice and you get it wrong, you get known as someone who no one's going to buy change from, right? Is that a career limiting factor? For sure, it's big. And I think this one concept, right, has been probably the biggest career boost that I ever had, right, in my 40 years of working. And that's the ability to be able to pitch things. Where I learnt it primarily was from an entrepreneur in America. I paid to attend a course over there. The course was 1 week long, cost $10,000. Right, he was doing $100 million deals in 30 minutes. Right? And he gave us some of the insights into this framework. Where I was applying it was getting people to do operations where they could get killed, where the downside is death. And how important is the pitch to get people to go and do something where they can potentially die? Yeah, it became very important in my previous life on pitching a mission very well so people bought into it. So I kind of got my head around that thing, So it wasn't about money, it was all about behaviour at the end of the day. When you're talking about $100 million pitches or $10 million or $1 pitches, you're still talking about behaviour. Would you agree? Right, so how important is the pitch? Syntax. It's vital, yeah. So I think about a pitch as though my life depends on it, and I'll pitch it the best I can because that's my responsibility. It's irresponsible to poorly sell a good idea. Would that be fair? Another point, before I give you another demo of this, is the ethics of it. Right? The assumption is that you're here and you're presenting good ideas. So that's a fair assumption, isn't it? Like, you know, productivity ideas are there for the benefits of people. The ethics, when we're talking about influence and change and all those types of things, the ethics never lie with the tool. The ethics lie with the person. Ethics always lie with the person. So this kind of thing, right, the problem with it is the people who sell garbage, the people who do the rip-offs are very good at it. True, isn't it? The people who have great ideas tend not to be so good at it. They tend to be very good at developing ideas. And this tends to be the missing piece. So in that sequence of getting from idea to action, the pitching side of it tends to be the underdone piece. Okay? How many of you learned how to pitch an idea when you went to university or school? Very few. Very few people. How many of you learned in school how to come up with good technical ideas and solve problems? That's the majority of people. So the ideas part of it, right, just goes hand in hand with this piece. Does that make sense? If I were pitching a carbon tax, right, I would follow this sequence and say something like this. It's probably something you can't sell, but anyway, I'll give it a run. It'd be something like this. Ladies and gentlemen, the reason that we're here today is to talk about the sustainability of our current living standards for our families. Everyone would agree with that, wouldn't you? You got a great idea. Okay, it doesn't tell you how we're going to do it. Right. The reason we're talking about that is there's all these statistics, you could put all the data up and say, you know, that indicate that the temperature of the planet is rising, that our resources are depleting, and blah, 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 right? And there's all this doom and gloom occurring. We don't know what's going to happen to the economy. You know, they're talking about the American following the Roman Empire collapse, okay? What I'm proposing to you today is what would I call it? An environmental contribution scheme. Who would ever call it a tax? Fair point? Yeah, environmental contribution scheme. And what that is where we get to participate and say that we did our bit in sustaining the future. And how it works is we're going to tax you. But if you do this, right, your kids are going to look at you, you can look them in the eye and you can say, I did my bit for you. You get the flow of it? Okay, what questions have you got about that? Anyone?
Where do you normally get most of the resistance in your cycle? I imagine not at the beginning, as you suggested. Is the what, the how, the what?
Yeah, I think resistance generally in my experience comes from the what. But when people get the syntax wrong, I'm pretty good at selling stuff, right? And I'll tell you where it comes from, teaching stuff. Because when I teach, what's the format we follow? It's the same thing, because I'm trying to get an action, you know, to occur. So the resistance occurs is if you put this up front, because they'll attach pain to something, so I'd rather it to be to their current behaviour than be to me. Does that make sense? So that's where the resistance comes from, I think. But the other part of it that we haven't mentioned, you know, in 20 minutes we kind of can't cover everything, is the fact that unless you have rapport and connection up front, rapport and connection and trust, right, as an underpinning or a baseline assumption, right, if people don't like you, they don't trust you, it doesn't matter how well you pitch it. Would that be fair? Right, it's going to be very, very hard to get ideas into people's heads. So part of the pre-work or pre-framing about the whole thing is that you build trust with people, you know, they get to trust you, and you build rapport with them. They've got to connect with you. They've got to like you. You know, birds of a feather flock together. Rapport is based on there's something similar about us and therefore I like you. True? So I think that's the underpinning part. If you get that up front, then you present this. When I come here and present to a group of people that I have no idea with, how long have I got to build rapport? I wonder if I've even been able to manage it. but you know, you've got a very, very short period of time to be able to do that. So that's got to be there. Does that answer your question? Yeah, it's an important part. But I go, change the syntax, right, at your risk. That's the bottom line. This one flip chart is the most photographed presentation that we do. I think we've delivered this to about 10,000 CPAs, and the takeaway was that now is a framework for doing big dollar pitches. because it follows human behaviour. But you know, I like the idea of how you do one thing's how you do everything. Then you apply that in teaching. You apply it in the conversation with the kids. The goal is to influence behaviour. Does that make sense? Not to employ a process. Okay. We all good? How are we going for time? Travelling okay? Okay. Any other questions?
Yes, I have one. I'm over here.
Where'd that come from?
Hello.
George.
Can you please remind us what the AB is in the blue on your chart?
Actions or behaviours?
Thank you.
Yeah.
George, there's a question here. If you present an abstract idea, do you find sometimes the person you're pitching to might go straight to how? Oh yeah, I get it. The answer's this. If that happens, do you find it important to go back to why to help them make the link, or would you just run with them?
If they sort of throw out their what?
Yeah, if they
when I
go
was
straight
here-
to what? Oh yeah, I get your point, let's do this.
Yeah.
Would you go with them, or would you slow them down and go back to why and reaffirm?
What I wouldn't do is try and use, let's use a metaphor, right? I wouldn't use karate on them. Karate is where you stop them, you kind of block them. You know the difference between karate and aikido? Karate's force against force. Aikido is where you use their energy. Does that make sense? I'll show you how it works. Brent, attack me. No, I'm kidding. You wanted to too. What I would do is, if they throw an idea out, right, then use it in some way. If they say, listen, you know, I get this and I know how it works, and I'd go, great, you know, obviously you have some experience. So what I'm going to ask is, what I present, let's see how your experience blends with that. Does that make sense? Yeah, so I've always had it in the back of my head that whatever comes at me, I just use it. Make sense? Other thoughts?
Sorry, so you talked about rapport and building up a good reputation with people. Say, for example, you had a bad first impression with someone. How do you go about changing that impression?
Your impression or their impression
their
of you?
impression of you.
That's a tough question, actually. I think it depends on what's, you know, driving it. But my number one goal is not to create the bad impression in the first place. But I think what I would do is probably have a conversation with them to kind of turn it around. But you know what I learned in all my years? I had a corporate role in BHP. It was my last employed job. And one of the things that I did was I went around and I tried to create trust, right? Because trust is one of the most important things. People go, because people say to me, they go, yeah, people trust me. And I go, really? Do you really think so? Yeah, they trust me, you know, they go, but have you tested it? Because what I think trust is built, in fact, I'll give you a metaphor, a story for it. I was asked to turn around run a hospital for a year. You know what I know about hospitals? How to put people in them. That was it. I know nothing about hospitals. But they asked if I would turn this hospital around because it was suffering financial problems and industrial problems. What I did for the first 6 weeks is I went around the hospital and I spoke to every single person in that hospital and I asked them 2 questions. I said, if you were me, what would be the one thing that you would do that make a difference? And the second question I asked was, if I could do one thing for you that would make a difference to your day-to-day work, what would it be? Tell me what that is. Then I spent the next 6 weeks doing what? Doing those things. It took me 3 months, right, to get people ready to change. And it was 3 months of building rapport and building trust, because I came in as this was overseas, I came in as an expatriate, and you know what? They didn't like me. Does that make sense? Because they had all of that history of negativity with expatriates. So that's how my port of call. I go, stop asking for stuff. I go, do stuff for them. But it's got to be stuff that relates to them. Like when I had the corporate role, what I did was rang all the key influencers, contact all the key influencers in all the big assets within BHP Billiton, and I said, look, you know, what's one problem that we've got some excess capacity? What's one problem that you got that we can help you with? See, so I'm not asking them to do something for me. I'm going around giving them something, and then when they gave me the problem, we would contract resources to go and do it, and they're all money-making activities, so it generated value. What are we doing in that process of doing something for them? What are we building? What are we building? Trust, right? But the second thing we're building is in persuasive frameworks, right? Because there's more to this picture, right? We could talk for a couple of days on this. There's more to it. Within this, there's the persuasive frameworks. And one of the principles of persuasion is reciprocation. The strongest persuasive principle in America, United Kingdom and Australia, right? These three countries is reciprocation. It's a deeply embedded, deeply ingrained feeling or sense of obligation that if someone gives you something or does something for you, what do you feel obliged to do? Give it back. You with me? There's a strong obligation here. So what in my head, I'd planned it, was to go to all of the key stakeholders in the organisation around the world. We're talking the heads of the minerals, assets and that type of thing. Solve a problem for them, right? To build trust, that I'm not here to do anything wrong, I'm here to help them. And two, get them in a position where when I come and ask for something, they're probably going to give it to me because they feel obligated. They give something back. And I found that to be the single most powerful, influential tool at a senior level, is to do things for other people for positive reason, and so that when it comes to change, now when I ask for change, what happens? They feel obliged to help me out here. So what do you think? How's that answer sit? All right? Tough question, but there's many ways of approaching it. Other questions? Anything? Okay. If we look back at this, the reason why you would do that is it's a career enhancer, right? Your ability to be able to create change ethically and smoothly and quickly is going to stand you out from the rest of the crowd. Would you agree? And it's also going to make you more effective as a partner and as a parent in getting change in your family. Because how you do one thing is how you do everything. They're all related, right? Pitching ideas is pitching ideas. And the hardest person you'll ever change the second hardest is probably your partner or your kids. The hardest is you. So where you practice this is at home. It's the lab. But then you bring it back to work. It makes you more effective in rolling out continuous improvement ideas. Makes you more effective in getting people to adhere to SOPs, right? Whether you're in huddles or whether you're presenting ideas to customers, right? You're going to be more effective in selling stuff. And how many of you would agree if you can sell stuff better, good ideas, that's a good thing for you and your organisation, by show of hands? Would you agree with that? Cool. Okay. The gun battle, right? It went on for some time, right? And I was unarmed, I had a radio, and people that I used to work with, wish they had a snapshot of this, me sitting crouched like trying to conceal myself in the smallest space behind a Land Cruiser while all these gunshots are being fired. The gunfire abated here. A policeman had been shot. Actually, the way it worked out was the police had come out and the bank robbers had come out this way. So that was the fire lane. Now, they'd shot a policeman, so the police retracted, and they now were going to make their getaway. There was a basketball tournament located over here somewhere. And the funny thing about some of the third world countries is if there's gunfire or violence, right, unlike us where we would run away, you know what they do? Yeah, they all run to it. So about 3,000 people are running towards the gunfire. Now I'm sitting here and a guy comes across here and stands about 50 or 60 metres away from me, and he sprays over the heads of the crowd with an AK-47. Yeah, emptied magazines across their heads. So they all dispersed, and I'm just sitting here going, this is not happening to me. And in the meantime, they had grabbed the manageress of the bank, and they took off with her, picked him up and drove out around the town and escaped and took her hostage. So over the course of the next 24 hours or something, we recovered the hostage, which was the bank manageress. And over the course of the next 2 weeks, we resolved it and we captured the offenders. So I was kind of connected between the company and the political part of this, government part of this country. And the interesting thing is that one event, right, caused me to be promoted 5 times in the next 6 years. I doubled my pay and I attribute it to that event. The reason is it gave me exposure to the managing director, the chairman of the board, and the board, right? But the exposure was one part of it. What made it work was the fact that I made decisions. I didn't have all the information. I was decisive enough to decide and run with it. And then I would pitch my idea to them. And that's kind of like today. You've got a decision to make, and that is, do you do this stuff, or do you continue with the same habits that you always have? That's a fair point, isn't it? So I would hope that when you leave here that you decide to give it a run. Just try it. It's a simple flow. It's just maybe a slightly different way than you've been presenting it. And if you're prepared to give it a run, I know you'll get the rewards. I thank you for your time, and I wish you well.
Thanks, George.